Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton. Chapter 20. Section. Sacramento and the, quote, Panther Bill. Bobby and I look back on the early days of the Black Panthers with nostalgia. It was a time of discovery and enthusiasm. We had hit on something unique. By standing up to the police as equals, even holding them off, and yet remaining within the law, we had demonstrated Black pride to the community in a concrete way. Everywhere we went, we caused traffic jams. People constantly stopped us to say how much they respected our courage. The idea of armed self-defense as a community policy was still new and a little intimidating to them, but it also made them think. More important, it created a feeling of solidarity. We saw how Black citizens reacted to our movement. We were greatly encouraged. Despite the ever-present danger of retaliation, the risks were more than worth it. At that time, however, our activities were confined to a small area, and we wanted Black people throughout the country to know the Oakland story. In April 1967, we were invited to appear on a radio talk show in Oakland, the kind where people phone in questions and make comments. Early in the program, we explained our 10-point program, why we were focusing on point 7, and why it was necessary for Black men to arm themselves. We also made it clear that we were within our constitutional rights. Hundreds of calls poured in. The lines were jammed. Some people agreed with us, others disputed our points. We welcomed the discussion, because criticism helped us to find weaknesses in our program and to sharpen our position. One of the callers was Donald Mulford, a conservative Republican state assemblyman from Piedmont, one of the wealthy white sections of Oakland. Mulford was so close to Oakland's power structure that his call could only mean he saw political profit in attacking the Black Panthers. He told us that he planned to introduce a bill into the state legislature to make it illegal for us to patrol with our weapons. It was a bill, he said, that would, quote, get the Black Panthers. Mulford's call was a logical response of the system. We knew how the system operated. If we used the laws in our own interests and against theirs, then the power structure would simply change the laws. Mulford was more than willing to be the agent of change. A few days later, the paper carried a story about Mulford's, quote, Panther Bill. In its particulars was what we had expected. A bill intended to suppress the people's constitutional right to bear arms. Until then, white men had owned and carried weapons with impunity. Groups like the Minutemen and the Rangers in Richmond were known to have arsenals, but nobody introduced bills against them. Mulford had been asked by the Oakland police to introduce this bill because some, quote, young Black toughs, as they called us, were walking around with guns. The bill was further evidence of this country's vicious double standard against Blacks. The usual pattern of white racism was gradually being put into effect. They would escalate the killing of Blacks, but this time the police would do the job that the Ku Klux Klan had done in the past. The Black Panthers have never viewed such paramilitary groups as the Ku Klux Klan or the Minutemen as particularly dangerous. The real danger comes from highly organized establishment forces, the local police, National Guard, and the United States military. They were the ones who devastated Watts and killed innocent people. In comparison to them, the paramilitary groups are insignificant. In fact, these groups are hardly organized at all. It is the uniformed men who are dangerous and who come into our communities every day to commit violence against us, knowing that the laws will protect them. Bobby Seale and I discussed the Mulford bill against his background. Sheriff Younger had suggested facetiously that the Dowell family attempt to get their case heard at the state capitol. The Dowell family only wanted some good to come out of all the grief inflicted on them. We knew that the Dowells would get no better consideration in Sacramento than they had received from Younger. The legislators would probably tell them to go to the governor, and the governor would point them to Washington. Institutions work this way. A son is murdered by the police, and nothing is done. The institutions send the victim's family on a merry-go-round, going from one agency to another, until they wear out and give up. This is a very effective way to beat down poor and oppressed people who do not have the time to prosecute their cases. Time is money to poor people. To go to Sacramento means loss of a day's pay, often loss of a job. If this is a democracy, obviously it is a bourgeois democracy, limited to the middle and upper classes. Only they can afford to participate in it. Knowing all this, we nonetheless made plans to go to Sacramento. That we would not change any laws was irrelevant, and all of us, Black Panthers and Dowells, realized that from the start. Since we were resigned to a runaround in Sacramento, we decided to raise the encounter to a higher level in the hope of warning people about the dangers in the Mulford bill and the ideas behind it. A national outcry would help the Dowell family by showing them that some good had come from their tragedy. Also, it might mobilize our community even more. Dozens of reporters and photographers haunt the Capitol, waiting for a story. This made it the perfect forum for our proclamation. If the legislators got the message, too, well and good. But our primary purpose was to deliver it to the people. Actually, several groups went. 4 or 5 members of the Dowell family, a group of brothers from East Oakland recruited by Mark Comfort, and the Black Panthers. The Black Panthers and Comfort's cadre were armed. The party agreed that I ought not to make the trip for 2 reasons. First, I was on probation from the old Odell Lee case, and they did not want to jeopardize my freedom. Second, if any arrests were made in Sacramento, someone should be able to raise bail money and do whatever else was necessary. Before they left, I prepared Executive Mandate Number 1, which was to be our message to the Black communities. It read, quote, "The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense calls upon the American people in general, and Black people in particular, to take careful note of the racist California legislature now considering legislation aimed at keeping Black people disarmed and powerless, while racist police agencies throughout the country intensify the terror, brutality, murder, and repression of Black people. At the same time that the American government is waging a racist war of genocide in Vietnam, the concentration camps in which Japanese Americans were interned during World War II are being renovated and expanded. Since America has historically reserved its most barbaric treatment for non-white people, we are forced to conclude that these concentration camps are being prepared for the Black people, who are determined to gain their freedom by any means necessary. The enslavement of Black people at the very founding of this country, the genocide practiced on the American Indians, and the confinement of the survivors on reservations, the savage lynching of thousands of Black men and women, the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and now the cowardly massacre in Vietnam, all testify to the fact that towards people of color, the racist power structure of America has but one policy: repression, genocide, terror, and the big stick. Black people have begged, prayed, petitioned, and demonstrated, among other things, to get the racist power structure of America to right the wrongs which have historically been perpetrated against black people. All of these efforts have been answered by more repression, deceit, and hypocrisy. As the aggression of the racist American government escalates in Vietnam, the police agencies of America escalate the repression of black people throughout the ghettos of America. Vicious police dogs, cattle prods, and increased patrols have become familiar sights in black communities. City Hall turns a deaf ear to the pleas of black people for relief from this increasing terror. The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense believes that the time has come for black people to arm themselves against this terror before it is too late. The pending Mulford Act brings the hour of doom one step nearer. A people who have suffered so much for so long at the hands of a racist society must draw the line somewhere. We believe that the black communities of America must rise up as one man to halt the progression of a trend that leads inevitably to their total destruction. End of statement. When I gave Bobby his instructions, I impressed upon him that our main purpose was to deliver the message to the people. If he was fired upon, he should return the fire. If a gun was drawn on him and it was his interpretation that the gun was drawn in anger, he was to use whatever means necessary to defend himself. His instructions were not to fire or take the offensive unless in imminent danger. If they attempted to arrest him, he was to take the arrest as long as he had delivered the message. The main thing was to deliver the message. In stressing these points, I told him that if he was invited in or allowed inside the legislature, he was to read the message inside. But if it was against the rules to enter the legislature, or if measures were taken to block him, then he was not to enter, but to read the message from the Capitol steps. The Black Panther troops rolled out for Sacramento early on the morning of May 2nd. As soon as they left, I went to my mother's house. I had promised to mow her lawn that day. But I took a portable radio along and put it on the front step to listen for news. In the house, I turned the television set on and asked my mother to keep an eye on it. Then I started mowing. About noon, a bulletin interrupted the radio program. It told of brothers at the Capitol with weapons. My mother called out to me that all channels were showing the event. I ran into the house, and there was Bobby reading the mandate. The message was definitely going out. Bobby read it twice, but the press and the people assembled were so amazed at the Black Panther's presence, and particularly the weapons, that few appeared to hear the important thing. They were concentrating on the weapons. We had hoped that after the weapons gained their attention, they would listen to the message. Later, another bulletin came on saying that the brothers had been arrested, Bobby for carrying a concealed weapon, although he was only wearing his gun openly on his hip. Some of the other brothers were charged with failing to remove the rounds from the chambers of their guns when they put the weapons back in the car. I got on the phone and finally made contact with one of the Black Panther women who had gone along. She told me what had happened, and I began to initiate the next phase of our plan, raising bail money. That night, I went to a local radio station where a talk show was on. People calling in to discuss the incident had been told that I was in jail, and I decided the best way to deal with that was by confrontation. So I went in there, as Malcolm would have done, and asked for equal airtime. One of the startled program directors looked at me and said, "Well, you're sort of in jail." I said, "Yes, I am in jail, but let me have equal time anyway." On the air, I explained the Sacramento ploy. My explanation was not very effective, I felt, because people who call these shows are always more interested in themselves than in the issues, and you have to fight through that first. But I was able to make an appeal for money. We were faced with $50,000 bail in Sacramento, and within 24 hours I had raised the $5,000 needed to get the troops back on the streets. Our plans had worked exactly as we hoped. Looking back, I think our tactic at Sacramento was correct at that time, but it was also a mistake in a way. It was the first time in our brief existence that an armed group of Black Panthers had been arrested, and it was a turning point in police perceptions. We took the arrests because we had a higher purpose. But it was not until then that the police started attempting to disarm the party. They leveled shotguns on the brothers, handcuffed them, and generally pushed them around. I had given orders not to fire unless fired upon. Maybe the order should have been to fire on everybody in there. Then they would have realized we were serious. But our purpose was not to kill, it was to inform, to let the nation know where the party stood. The police, however, took it to mean that the party was only a front with weapons, and that we would not defend ourselves. This attitude caused a number of problems for us, and it took some time to restore caution to the police after Sacramento. Now everything is as it used to be, because they know they will have a fight on their hands if they try to attack us. Sacramento was certainly a success, however, in attracting international attention. Even those who did not hear the complete message saw the arms, and this conveyed enough to Black people. The Bay Area became more aware of the party, and soon we had more members than we could handle. From all across the country, calls came to us about establishing chapters and branches. We could hardly keep track of the requests. In a matter of months, we went from a small Bay Area group to a national organization, and we began moving to implement our 10-point program. End of chapter 20.